A young pianist records one of his pieces for a piano roll. The work is already more than 15 years old, because he wrote it when he was just 10. He was born in 1897 in Brno, and he was a prodigy. The title of this first big success was The Snowman. The composer's father, Julius, was the much-feared critic of the Vienna paper, The New Free Press. And the name of the prodigy? Erich Wolfgang Korngold. Korngold's life moved between two worlds, between Europe and the USA. Between an old world and a new world. Between the fantasies of the Habsburg Empire and the dream factory of Warner Brothers. Between Viennese charm and the high life of Hollywood. Erich Korngold wrote music for the movies and is renowned for that to this day. But he always wanted to return to the concert hall and to the opera house. To begin his story, we too must return to the Vienna of the Habsburgs.
To grow up in a city where you'd had Beethoven and Brahms and Mahler, all sorts of interesting people, you have layers and layers of traditions and culture that are go without saying. Vienna must have been musically like Italy was during the Renaissance. He was born a nightingale, you know, and if you're born a crow, what can you do?
He's the only example of a composing prodigy that I have found who had a fully formed musical personality from the word go, from the beginning. In his very first works, for example, the Don Quixote suite, the very opening movement, it couldn't be by anybody else. And he's 10 years old in that piece. Even though he was a little boy, he was writing as an adult. And that is why the people of the stature of Bruno Walter, Arthur Schnabel, Fritz Kreisler, Maria Jerezza, all of these great musicians performed his music. Richard Strauss and Mahler were absolutely astonished by him. And it was because he wrote like, dare I say it, like they did.
Nobody has ever been able to explain it, and I don't think he perhaps could himself.
He was a magnificent pianist. How did he acquire this skill? Most people who are brilliant pianists spend years in the conservatory. He had a few lessons from a needy relative, and that was it. He always played the piano, his mother said once, when she was asked, when did Erich first play the piano? He always played the piano.
Leiter am Klavier, Arnold Rosé an der Violine und Friedrich Buchsbaum am Cello. Und in der ersten Reihe saß der kleine Komponist, links und rechts seine Eltern von sich. Dieses prominente Trio begann also zu spielen und Julius Korngold, es dauerte nicht lange, er war Kritiker vom Beruf, fing an zu wispern, also für meinen Geschmack sind Sie zu schnell. Die Mutter wisperte zurück, also Sie sind eher zu langsam, eher zu langsam. Der alte Julius sprach wieder, also Sie sind zu schnell. Die Mutter sind zu langsam. Der kleine Komponist dazwischen machte sich etwas gerade und flüsterte zurück, also ich finde es sehr richtig, wie Sie spielen. Drehten sich beide Eltern zu ihm rum und sagten unisono, du Kusch!
The young Erich went to Alexander Zemlinsky for orchestration lessons. To the dismay of Father Julius, Zemlinsky pointed the prodigy in the direction of the new musical developments of the time.
Gosh, you know, Mozart and Mendelssohn would have thought, wow, too. It's just so full of emotion, of its richness, its fullness, its melodic expressiveness. I find that very attractive.
The dramatic overture is the work of someone just 13 years old.
I do have to say, I mean, as a conductor, you stand in awe of his orchestrational ability from the very first pieces at the age of 13 or 14. And right through the end of his life, he was amazingly sophisticated, elaborate, detailed orchestrator with an excellent ear for color and balance and original sounds. Right up from Schauspiel Overture through the symphony, spanning 50 years of output.
Richard Strauss was ready to conduct the music of this prodigy. He wrote, "Such mastery can produce amazement, even fear. The control of form, expression, harmony is really astonishing."
It's because of his extraordinary harmonic sense, his sense of color, which is quite personal to him. His second opera, Violante, opens in a way that could only be by him. He takes some notes, E natural, B flat, D, F sharp, and C sharp. Those notes form a chord, the Violante chord. If Strauss had written them, it would have probably been a declamatory chord, much as Wagner would have done in Tristan and Isolde, for example. What does Korngold do with those notes? He separates them out across 4 octaves, across the whole orchestra. It's such a completely Korngoldian sound, and immediately you have to listen.
Violante, a Renaissance drama of love and revenge, set against the backdrop of the Venetian Carnival. The 18-year-old composer said to his father, "You see how I can portray love in music without having any experience of it." Anton Webern complained, "Publishers, performance, the kid has it all. I feel old already." The rapid and overwhelming success of Korngold as composer and conductor was unstoppable, even by the outbreak of the First World War. The prodigy was caricatured as a huge monument in front of the Vienna Opera. He did his military service as a bandmaster. No surprise there. For his regiment, he wrote a military march. "Too quick," said his commanding officer. Korngold replied, "Yes, sir, but it's for the retreat." He was soon back in the world he loved, writing for the concert hall and for the stage. He seemed destined to fulfill all the expectations aroused by his precocious gifts. Erich Wolfgang Korngold was resolutely unpolitical all his life. Political events always took him by surprise. So in a way, the disasters of the First World War were, shall we say, much ado about nothing.
Ja, ich habe ihn das erste Mal gehört im Jahr 1920. Da waren vom Burgtheater Vorstellungen im Schönbrunner Schlosstheater. Und da hat er die Musik zu Viel Lärm um nichts gespielt. Bei der Premiere hat er dirigiert, da war es mit Orchester und die folgenden Aufführungen hat er am Klavier gespielt. Das war meine erste Erinnerung. Ich glaube, da lebt niemand mehr aus dieser Zeit, der das gehört hat.
Korngold composed not only orchestral music, but songs and chamber music too. At just 19, Korngold seemed to be working his way through all the forms of music towards a particular goal, the grand three-act opera. Using the pseudonym Paul Schott, he and his father constructed a libretto out of Georges Rodenbach's then very fashionable novel, Rouge la Morte. Die Tote Stadt, the Dead City, is a city of the past, both in its appearance and in the dreams of its inhabitants. The hero Paul is obsessed with the past, and with the memory of his dead wife, Marie. He believes that the past can return, but there is no resolution to his obsession. He meets Marietta, a dancer. She looks like Marie, but of course she has a disturbingly different personality. Like the detective in Hitchcock's Vertigo, he wanders the city in search of his dreams.
aus mir, ihr Haus umschleich ich, gequält von Angst, Sehnsucht und Treu. Was ward aus mir?
Nun lag ihr mein
jetzt sie nicht in diesem Haus, sie fehlte im Theater, seh ich sie nicht, was Sehnsucht mich nach ihr, um sie zu sehen, bange ich nicht minder. Fasst dich ein Schauer mit mir in der Stadt, bestöhnen deine alten Träume. Es Wasser seufzt, zerbrechen sich an dem Jahrhundert alten Nachten. Gespenst Ranz und Unheil, Wege um die Stadt. Eins von eins mit deiner Keuschheit, so wie du eins mit deinem Toten warst. Und unrast Begehret in die Stille und Versunkenheit einer Nacht.
The Dead City was the foundation of Korngold's worldwide success as an opera composer. The double premiere in Cologne and Hamburg on the 4th of December 1920 was quickly followed by 60 further productions.
I think that great creative artists are able to inhabit other people's souls in their imagination, and that even a 19-year-old Korngold was somehow able to inhabit that soul and to imagine what it was like to be, one of the dark, turbulent characters in Die Tote Stadt or in the later operas. And that's marvelous. I mean, if the human condition did not allow that, then artistic expression, if you stop and think about it, would be stopped dead in its tracks, because only convicted felons would be able to write murder mysteries and tragedies. And yeah, we have incredible imaginations, and clearly a prodigy is equipped with an imagination that's well beyond what the normal human being can experience or describe. And for the music to come out of him at that age, there's something working in the brain and in the imagination that obviously he can't explain, the prodigy, and we, not having the same mental equipment, are at a loss to explain. But thank God it's there.
It was said that the composer was not allowed by his parents to cross the road on his own until he was 19. Nevertheless, photographs suggest that he had developed a healthy interest in the opposite sex. There was one special girl, a singer and actress from a famous theatrical family, Luzi von Sonnenthal. Looking back many years later, she described her life as Korngold's wife as one long and happy love story.
She really lived for him. There's no doubt. They met when I think she was 16, and he was the love of her life. And they lived as a friend. One of her dear friends said one time that Erich and Lucy just went through life like, two children in a fairy tale, hand in hand. It was most remarkable, and I'm not the only person who said that. It wasn't just me looking through, rose glasses or something.
It was to his wife that Korngold dedicated the opera which he hoped would be his masterpiece, Das Wunder der Heliane. In the story, a dictator forbids laughter and love. A stranger rouses the people against him and is imprisoned. Heliane, the wife of the dictator, is fascinated by the stranger. She visits him in prison, and at his wish stands naked before him. The score is more complex and ambitious than anything the composer had attempted before. But symbolism and utopian idealism are notoriously hard to present on the stage. A rather feeble libretto gave no support to the protagonists. The success of Die Tote Stadt was not to be repeated, despite the ecstatic power and originality of Korngold's music. The critics of the time preferred the new operas of Kurt Weill and Ernst Krenek. For them, Korngold was already old-fashioned. Despite a brilliant marketing campaign, including a special Heliana cigar, the opera was not a success. Korngold was heartbroken. Korngold's parents had opposed his marriage to Lutzi. They even sent a chaperone on the honeymoon. In order to escape their domination and to find financial independence, the composer began in the 1920s to work in the flourishing world of operetta. It brought psychological relief.
The second reason I think he did it was he really enjoyed it. I mean, one of the most astonishing things about Korngold is that he was such a chameleon. He could write or excel in light music and the most dramatic high music equally well. And there are very few composers who were able to do that.
Greetings to You, Beautiful Venice is the Duke's first aria in Johann Strauss's A Night in Venice, sung here by Richard Tauber. Today, the aria is an integral part of the score. But it was Korngold who found an old melody by Strauss and adapted it to the needs of a new production. It is Strauss, but filtered through the creative imagination of Erich Korngold.
And Tauber was a very big star, very big star indeed, and needed Tauberlied to make the girls in the audience swoon.
The operetta theatre gave Korngold all kinds of chances to show his skills. In the case of one operetta, Roses from Florida, the composer Leo Fahl had died while writing it. So Korngold composed nearly the whole piece. He adapted, he rewrote, he added, he conducted. Whatever was needed, he could provide it.
He was the star of the show on the podium. And he used to sit at the piano, you know, on a raised dais and accompany the singers at the same time as conducting. Must have been some show.
The great Max Reinhardt had been instrumental in bringing Korngold into operetta. It was Reinhardt who provided the impetus for the next big move in the composer's career, a move to a new and different world. Hollywood called, and Korngold heard the call. Soon after Reinhardt arrived in the USA, he recommended to Warner Brothers that they should hire a young master to adapt the music of another prodigy, Felix Mendelssohn. Reinhardt was engaged upon a hugely ambitious film version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Korngold's task was not only to conduct the original music, but to add other music by Mendelssohn, and to compose new linking passages.
What Korngold brought was an incredible desire to get into areas that he hadn't gotten into before. He had never scored a film. He'd never adapted music, in the case of Mendelssohn for the Midsummer Night's Dream, for a film. He'd never worked with film at all.
But I think he had probably astonishing sophistication in understanding elapsed time in film and how the lengths of bits that are going to get cut and edited can fit. And I think most composers would be hopelessly at a loss to be able to do that.
He asks one of the technicians through an interpreter, how long is 1 foot of film? And the technician, who is, chewing gum and a bit of a wise guy, says, 12 inches. And Korngold says, no, I don't mean that. I mean, how long does it take on the screen? Well, no one had ever asked this question before. And so they went away to find out and came back and said, it's 2/3 of a second, Mr. Korngold. He said, I said, exactly the same time as the first 2 measures of the Mendelssohn Scherzo.
The awakening of the elves is marked by a subtle transition from Korngold to Mendelssohn.
And here he was, this name, this genius. And he was affiliated with Warner Brothers. That's why he got such a wonderful contract. The other composers were there churning it all out because that's what they did. And this is the Depression. They were happy, very happy. But they were given film after film after film. With Korngold, he had enough clout so that he could say, all right, I will stay, I will do some films. However, I want to do no more than 2 films a year. I want to have approval or the ability to turn something down. I would like as much time as possible to compose the score. I would like to be able to take the thematic material from the music that I'm writing, and if I want to, later on, use it for some of my concert works. Now, most of this was highly unprecedented at any studio, let alone Warner Brothers. But he was able to work out that deal.
I'm getting those chills and thrills just standing by, looking at these wonderful scores of the maestros like Erich Wolfgang Korngold. Every time I walk by here, I get those feelings in absentia and thinking about what has gone into the scores. For example, I've just pulled Captain Blood. Now here's the main title of the conductor score of Captain Blood. And all those notations are significant to the production and post-production. This is what a condensed conductor score looks like.
good, my lady.
Our love is dead, the love we thought so splendid. If these delights your mind may move, then live with me and be my love. But were I young and loved so well, then I might hold you close forever. Give you your flower.
You fool. You cowardly, hysterical fool. You and your...
I still remember how marvelous it was just to, you know, you always hear about how hard it is to get into a studio. You know, you have to practically have your blood type. And with him, no problem. We just, you know, but he never drove, but my mother-in-law drove. And I can still see him sitting, and he always wore a hat, and we went into the gate. And the man at the gate just went like this, and my father-in-law went like that, and, you know, and took off his hat, and the man at the gate said, "Oh, good morning, Professor," and in we went. That was pretty exciting for me, of course.
The Warner Brothers Dream Factory, with its huge studios and backlots, was in a way like an opera stage. For this new world, Korngold could use his talents as an adapter and his knowledge of Wagnerian music drama to produce a sophisticated kind of film score. and it quickly won him 2 Oscars.
Korngold had a great deal of authority at Warner's. Nobody was telling him what to do when he was scoring. They knew what he could do, and they let him alone, which of course is a most enviable position to be in, particularly in what is basically a factory situation. And he had this innate dramatic sense.
And I think then he really became entranced by the film medium, so much so that he invented, almost at one stroke, the symphonic film score that we know today. His style became the style of Hollywood. The sound of film music became him.
The elaborate synthetic world of the Hollywood studio backlot provided the unpolitical immigrant with a fantasy America, a peaceful, if artificial, haven far away from the old world, which was going to hell.
He was a composer, had to compose. He just had to write music. And this is a great avenue for him to write music in his style and get it played in the next day or the next week. I really think he needed some kind of outside, either literary or filmic sense of film story or idea to bring the best out of him as a composer. He was a dramatist. And when he could do operas, that worked for him. When the operas went out of fashion and he went, or for whatever reason, he went into films, it was a replacement for operas. You never notice that he's just kind of treading water for time. Everything kind of goes and ends perfectly at where he wants it to end. And it's an amazing thing. I don't know how he did it.
I think just by the very nature of Korngold coming to town with this new voice and this more complex rhythmic harmonic structure basically changed the sound in a lot of ways for Hollywood, you know?
He had a wonderful innate sense of timing. He also composed it with a special projection room where he had a piano brought in, and they would run reel by reel the film he was working on while he sat there and improvised. Now, he had already worked out thematic ideas, but he would improvise in the development, in the dramatic underpinnings and so forth while watching the film. Then he would go home and he would then sort of, work it out more in detail with his piano score and so forth. And then he'd go back to the studio and run it again. So that by the time he got on the scoring stage, he knew exactly what he wanted to do.
And he would play it and get the orchestra to play with such fire and tenacity that it built this excitement into the sequence that he was writing the music for. It was incredible the way he would weave his textures in and out, but with this rhythmic sense as well. It's this ebb and flow that he gets going underneath all the action on the screen.
They may have been short little snippets here and there, but strung together, put together, there was an overall sense of harmony, of key, of all the important things that make, music listenable away from the cinema.
Korngold had been a master orchestrator in the opera house and the concert hall. But in the cinema, there was always the pressure of a deadline, and also the sheer quantity of music to be written, sometimes 90 minutes for one film. Korngold could only provide a short score, which would then be taken over by highly skilled Hollywood orchestrators like Ray Heindorf and Hugo Friedhofer.
And Friedhofer understood that Wagner, Richard Strauss, Mahler, Puccini blend, some of which Korngold drew upon in his particular style. So Friedhofer was able to relate to this and work with, they had a nice rapport. But in the final analysis, the orchestrations came out sounding like Korngold.
In the film Deception, the protagonist, a cellist, describes the music of Richard Strauss as belonging to the past and the music of Stravinsky as belonging to the present. The villain of the story is a fictional composer, Hallenius. His music, provided by Korngold, of course, is the music of the future. In the cello concerto at the end of the film, Eleanor Slatkin provided the sound for the actor Paul Henreid. Korngold liked the musical ideas well enough to transform the film music into an independent cello concerto for the concert hall. Korngold was relaxed about his life in two worlds. He said, "What other composer has the luck to write for Maria Yeritzer and for Betty Davis?"
I mean, he was not tall. He was rather, and shall we say, portly, but with great animation, with a twinkle in his eye, I should say, and always the quick, ready wit, which was really sometimes quite astonishing. And kind of impish even. Sometimes he would play funny little tricks, like he was always on a diet, quote, quote. And he loved chocolate. I mean, that's been too well documented. And I remember sometimes at the table, the little dog would they had a little celium, and the little dog liked to get food from the table, and then sometimes the dog would come in, and my father-in-law would say, "Oh, look," to his wife, "Oh, look at the dog." And then while she was looking at the dog, he would take something from the table, you know, like a child, you know, just playing little tricks. very accessible. I will say that what I wasn't prepared for was his piano playing. And though I'm not, you know, a musician, but it was just the most astonishing thing when he sat down and played. You had the feeling that he was almost a part of the piano.
He could sit at the piano, my husband said, and play a whole score as if you would swear you were hearing an orchestra.
The thing about Korngold was the urge to create was alive in his playing. So he never played a piece exactly the same way. He wanted to embellish it, to almost recompose the music.
A special treat for guests at a Hollywood party. Erich Wolfgang Korngold plays one of his most celebrated melodies, from Die Tote Stadt, the aria of Pierrot, with the words, "My feelings take me back to the past." Perhaps a sign of homesickness for Europe. In most ways, life in Hollywood was pleasant and calm. Korngold lived with his family in a beautiful house on Lake Toluca Drive. He kept open house and was a generous host. He supported countless exiles from Nazi Europe, including his own parents. In his role as father, Julius Leopold Korngold was like a reincarnation of Leopold Mozart. Now a critic without a job, he often attacked his son's lifestyle.
Ich wollte dich gestern überraschend besuchen. Ich komme in deinen Garten. Luzi, Elli Reichert, Helene Thiemich sitzen am Tisch, rauchen Zigaretten, spielen Karten und du liegst in der Hollywood-Schaukel und schläfst. Andere Komponisten unterrichten, komponieren, arbeiten und du schläfst. Das war etwas, was er nicht begreifen konnte. Dass der unglaubliche Stress, Filmmusik zu machen, 6 bis 8 Wochen, bis zu 15, 20 Stunden am Tag unter Zeitdruck zu komponieren, auch ein Stressfaktor war, das wollte er auch nicht sehen.
On the other hand, Julius was the keeper of his son's artistic conscience. It was Julius who told him to hang on to the rights of his film music. You can make use of this music, was his advice. His father recommended that he should take the thematic material from 3 films and weave it into a violin concerto. The soloist at the premiere was the great Jascha Heifetz. The concerto occupied Korngold for many years, until 1947.
And he was a famous borrower from himself, shamelessly, and I don't think he saw any shame at all in it. All of this was a contemporaneous jumble in his head, and that's very hard for most people to understand because our brains don't do that and our memories are not equipped to do that. But for him it seemed very natural, and I think that's simply how he created music, that it was created all the time. It was in a kind of data bank, and he used it when he wanted to, put it back in. And it was all interchangeable parts, and this is a remarkable and extraordinary, I think, very, very interesting brain.
In 1947, Korngold decided that it was time to leave Hollywood.
You know, there's a famous quip of his when he was asked, you know, why he was leaving Hollywood. And he says, well, when I first came to Hollywood, I didn't understand the dialogue. Now I do. And there's a grain of truth in that. Then, of course, his father had died, and so had Max Reinhardt. And it was like the end of an era for him. And I think he felt a slight twinge of guilt that somehow, now that the war was over, he had left his true calling and was somehow embroiled in motion pictures. And he said, I think, when he turned 50, 50 is a very high age for a child prodigy. I must make a decision now if I'm not going to be a motion picture composer for the rest of my life.
Korngold described his arrival in Austria in 1949 with the words, "To be back in Vienna, in my homeland after nearly 12 years. Well, it's like in Die Tote Stadt, the dream of a return fulfilled." But unlike the return of the hero in the final opera Die Catherine, Korngold's homecoming brought no happy ending.
It's always a tragic thing when one realizes what the real situation is when you go back. It's like returning home, you know. You can't go home again. As Thomas Wolfe once said.
Als das erste Mal zurückkehrte 1949, symptomatisch an der Grenze bei der Passkontrolle sagte jemand, ja, der Herr Professor Korngold, Jesus, wann fahrt's dann wieder zurück?
There also, I think, was a sense of settling old scores with Korngold's father. I'm sure of that. A number of the people who were in positions of authority in Vienna after the war had good reason to resent him and his father. And I have to say, perhaps controversially, but I'll say it anyway, a number of people in authority in Austria had been Nazis.
Unfortunately, people would say, Erich Wolfgang, you know, it was entirely different. And, you know, we're talking now almost 10 years since he'd been in Europe. And it was a long 10 years. Many things were happening in many different areas, certainly musically.
He invested all his efforts in a large-scale symphony. This was to be his comeback piece.
Yeah, I think there were melodic ideas. I wouldn't say he recycled them, but there were melodic shapes that's in the symphony in F sharp. The big horn melody in the scherzo of the symphony, again, clearly just ideas that appealed to him, the way harmonies appealed to him, the way melodic shapes appealed to him. They appealed to him from an early age, and he uses them inexhaustibly. Was extraordinary. The depth of what he accomplished in 10 years in Hollywood was remarkable and forever changed how films are underscored. And the notion that he could then just sort of translate that back into a career as a composer in post-war Europe, I think only all that proves is that he had a kind of tin ear for political and artistic and avant-garde developments.
The symphony was under-rehearsed and the premiere was a fiasco. Nobody wanted to take up the piece. After further unsuccessful trips to Europe, Korngold decided to remain in Los Angeles, a bizarre but at least a friendly environment.
Adagio.
Lucy Korngold wrote in her memoirs that he would sit for days staring into space. He was depressed. He felt like he was forgotten already, you know?
But the story does not end there. Accused of being out of fashion, the composer had once said, well, you can't expect an apple tree to produce apricots. He began work on a second symphony. In 2 years, he produced some 60 pages of sketches. Here we can hear for the very first time, although only on the piano, fragments of this second symphony. Critics in his last years had described his career as a depressing journey from genius to talent.
His talent was not geared toward growth, his talent was geared toward the spontaneous expression of ideas. And people have different talents, and I think we simply misunderstand him if we say, why didn't he grow? And we don't appreciate the notion that the way music poured out of him fully formed was a special talent that he had, and he was ideally suited for that kind of musical creation.
After suffering 2 strokes, Korngold gave up work on his second symphony. Korngold died on the 29th of November 1957. His sons Ernst and George, along with a group of passionate enthusiasts, championed his music. 20 years after his death, the music has returned to its public in full flower.
Jetzt wird wieder viel gespielt, in letzter Zeit. Lieder werden gesungen und das Sextett ist gespielt worden vor kurzem. Jetzt beginnt es wieder. Gott sei Dank.
Zu mir